Good evening and welcome to the news today. We are live from the Jaffa Port. 3 months of violence and no sign that the wave is subsiding. At least one Palestinian was killed Thursday in clashes that broke out during an IDF raid in the Kalandia refugee camp in the West Bank. This after 3 successive terror attacks this morning left 3 Israelis wounded, including one seriously. The Magen David Adom Emergency Service reported today that 24 Israelis have been killed and more than 250 injured since the violence erupted. At least 129 Palestinians have been killed, nearly half of them attackers. Let's go now live on the scene to Kalandia, where our correspondent Danny Swibel is standing by. Danny, good evening. We know that Israeli forces conducted raids on homes in Kalandia today. Can you give us an update on the ground from where you are, what the situation in Kalandia is at the moment?
I'm happy to report now that the scene is relatively quiet. This was not the case earlier today, even a few hours ago, when the IDF's elite unit, the Duvdevan unit, was going in to make an arrest of a Palestinian assailant that was one responsible or involved in an attack earlier. They were greeted by an angry mob of Palestinians. There was a scene of burning tires, the throwing of stones, as well as Molotov cocktails. Things intensified when one Palestinian either reportedly had a pistol or an explosive device, and in an attempt to use that on the Israeli unit, was shot and neutralized by them. And the scene continued on from there. The situation was able to calm after a few hours, as I said, and it is quiet here now. And it is the hopes that things remain quiet. Again, this was a very violent day throughout the West Bank, with 3 other attacks earlier that involved all the 3 Palestinian assailants being shot and killed. Again, it is Christmas Eve. The security forces are hoping, not only the Israeli security forces, but the Palestinian Authority security forces are hoping things remain calm, because after all, there are many people here who are visiting for the holiday season.
Yes, we are hoping that too. Danny Swibel standing by for us in Kalandia checkpoint. Thank you very much at this point. I'm joined now in the studio by Emmanuel Navon, Professor of International Relations at Tel Aviv University. Good evening.
Good evening.
And Shai Ben-Ari, our defense correspondent at Y24 News. Good evening, Shai. Shai, we just heard from Danny that it's quiet at the Kalandia checkpoint. How much do we know about the preparation the Israeli forces are doing to maintain this calm?
Right. Well, the security forces are quite concerned with the overall situation, but as regards, this ongoing wave of stabbings and vehicular attacks, they've been concerned for a number of months now. And the truth is, there is no real solution for the overall problem as regards those kinds of attacks on a military or security level, at least. And the Prime Minister has really said as much. He has called for a stiff upper lip, to quote Churchill. In terms of the holiday season, I'm not sure we can link it necessarily to this. We have seen a recent upspike over the past few days, but because this is a fairly disorganized effort, when you talk about these kinds of attacks, I wouldn't necessarily link it to that. The new concern right now really is the possibility of a certain step up in the violence. We know that certain sections, factors within the Hamas organization are perhaps looking to bring the current wave of violence more in the direction of the second Intifada, in terms of bringing in explosives and starting suicide bombings and more serious terror attacks. We saw that revelation yesterday with a certain terror ring uncovered. The worrying aspect here also certain connections that may very well exist between Hamas and the Islamic State. Fathi Hamad, who is the Hamas official in Gaza, who is thought to be behind this actual terror ring in terms of initiating it. He is known to have certain ties with Islamic State in Gaza. And overall, when you talk about this current terror wave, we are seeing more and more indications of a certain ideological motive. When you talk about these young people who go out and decide to stab or to carry out the vehicular attacks, they seem to be motivated on a certain level by that kind of ideology, Islamic State ideology, not just Hamas ideology. In fact, a lot of these youths openly reject both Hamas and Fatah, and some of them do identify openly with Islamic State. I would say that would be the major concern in terms of Israeli security.
And
apparatus.
really, on this point of the major concern, Professor Navon, how likely is an escalation? Because that's what we're all looking at right now. And what risk does it pose for Israel, also diplomatically?
Well, the question is really, does Mahmoud Abbas and his government have any control on the situation or not? It makes a big difference. We know that during the previous Intifada in 2000, Arafat himself was very much involved in it. He was able to either control it or make it worse. Today, it seems that many of those attacks are not directly, of course, promoted by Abbas, even though there is some kind of incitement in his media. But the question is really, how much control does he have on the ground on the situation? He happens to be very unpopular. His government, his PLO movement. Many commentators have been talking about the lost generation of Oslo, of kids who were born 20 years ago at the time of the Oslo agreements, and who have lost any trust in the PA and the Palestinian Authority. And therefore, it looks like it is out of control at this point.
Well, speaking on the issue of preparedness, Shai, we know we want to talk about also the preparedness of the Israeli security intelligence. We hear about an ISL in Nazareth today.
Right. Yeah, there were two Israelis who basically were uncovered as IS supporters. It's not the first case, and it's not the first case in Nazareth. There were two previous larger cells in the Nazareth area uncovered just within the past few months. And also in Hura, in the Negev, we're talking about more and more Israeli Arabs also identifying openly with the Islamic State, not so much openly, but very much on their own initiative. And the problem there really is there appears to be certain attempts to carry out attacks inside Israel in the name of IS, but they appear to be very minimal. It is very difficult for these people to get their hands on advanced firearms. They often make do with primitive firearms from the 40s, from the 50s. The main aspiration of many of them appears to be to want to try and get to Syria and Iraq, and that these two actually made it all the way to Turkey, where they weren't actually able to get into Syria. But some of them do. Very few of them do make it back. Once they do, a few cases that have happened, the Israeli security services have been able to put their hands on them.
Yes, a risk Israel has not yet been able to profile or deal with yet. Shai Ben Ari, our defense correspondent, thank you very much. Professor Navon, you're staying with us for our next item. We're going